Welcome to Alter Everything, a podcast about AI, analytics, and the future of work. I'm Joshua Bakakeu. Today is a special episode as we've hit our 200th show. And I'm excited to take on this new role as the podcast host going forward. For this episode, I'm joined by Patrick McGarry, Federal Chief Data Officer at ServiceNow, and Dr. Jupiter Bakakeu, Lead Generative AI Technologist at Alteryx. In this episode, we look ahead to see what AI in 2026 might just look like. We talk about the shift from AI as a clever answer machine to AI as something that actually gets work done through agents. We dig into why modernization, governance, and trust matter more than model choice, where voice fits into the future of AI interfaces, and what organizations should and maybe shouldn't be delegating to AI right now. If you're trying to understand how AI moves from experimentation to real impact, this conversation is for you. Let's jump in. For today's podcast, we have two amazing guests, and I purposely chose these two because I like how they come from totally different paths to AI, and they have different perspectives that I know you'll enjoy. First off, I'd like to introduce you to Patrick McGarry. Patrick, welcome to the 200th episode. I'd love for you to introduce yourself to our listeners and share a little bit about your background if you'd like.
Yeah, thanks, Joshua. Great to be here, and especially for such an auspicious 200th episode. Just by way of introduction, I'm currently the Federal Chief Data Officer at ServiceNow, following the acquisition of our company, Data.World, where we were focused on helping organizations really get control over their data and AI operations. So, I've spent most of my career working in, high stakes, regulated environments where, data and now AI really has to move beyond experimentation and into something dependable. So most of my work has been about helping teams modernize their data foundations, put the right governance in place, and now make AI useful rather than risky. So I've also been spending a lot of time writing about what the organizations need to do to change structurally to make AI work at scale, which is in an upcoming book, Beyond the Algorithm, which will be fun. And so I've spent a lot of time with this topic, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, books are so easy to write, aren't they, Patrick?
Yeah, until you have to edit them. Writing is easy, editing is hard.
Yeah, that part, editing for the 50th time, yes. I know that one well. Well, thank you, sir, and welcome to the show. Next, I'd like to introduce you all to Jupiter Bakakeu. Could you say hi, introduce yourself as well, and correct me on if I mispronounce your last name?
Yeah, don't worry, Joshua. It's Jupiter Bakakeu, actually, with the French pronunciation. Thank you for the invitation. So just to introduce myself, I'm Dr. Jupiter Bakakeu. So I'm lead generative AI lead, specifically for generative AI technology at Alteryx. And at the same time, I also endorse the role of applied data scientist at Alteryx. So my job on the day-to-day is less about chasing the newest model or training the newest model, but making sure that those models or actually those technology get transformed into real business, right? My optimal dream is to have the analytics, the agentic analytics actually be real, and having Alteryx actually be the implementation for the default for that technology. So my background, I am a researcher at the core. So I spend more than 8 years in research. I hold a PhD also in reinforcement learning, specifically in the manufacturing industry, where you have hard constraint, a real-time constraint. And those technology, agentic behavior is something that we had actually in the past. So I'm trying also to take everything that I have learned from that experience and bring it also into the business world, where we have some business user probably that are not familiar with those kind of requirements.
Yeah, love it. And then on top of all this, I have a little tidbit of background information on you, Jupiter. You don't just speak English, French, German? What else do we have here? Like 15
Modumba.
more languages? Yep, there you go.
Yes, I speak also Modumba. So I'm originally from Cameroon. Cameroon is a small country in the middle of Africa. And there we have also our own native language. It's called Medumba, spoken by, I will say, like 2 million people. It's not so big, but yes.
Sorry, Joshua, you only get English from me, and most of the time it's poorly put together. So that's all you get.
I'm still working on it. I'm still working. I was impressed because I've been to Germany and seen Jupiter, and he's just amazing. So let's get into it, gentlemen. Let's have some fun. Patrick, Jupiter, let's start with what, for lack of a better definition, I'm referring to as this sort of answer to work shift. In 2025, I talked to a lot of people, and they essentially said, in roundabout terms, that AI felt like this sort of really good magic trick. You know those illusion tricks where you're really sure that it's a trick, but you're still so blown away by it that you can't figure out how it exactly works? And in 2026, the question isn't going to be, should I be using this tool or that? Should I be using Claude for this answer? Or maybe ChatGPT is better for this type of answer. But more about, can any of these models reliably help me accomplish something without having me tell it every single minute detail? Shifting our minds from just getting answers back to actually starting to get work completed. Do you disagree with that idea? Do you have a different point of view? How would you see it? I'll start with you, Patrick, if you don't mind.
It's an interesting question. And as an initial thought, I'll give you a soundbite. That's one of my favorites, which is AI does not magically modernize your organization, but it does expose whether you have modernized.
That's true. Yep.
It's interesting
Love
when you
it.
start talking about going from that magic trick to something that's actually real. I think the AI gold rush has been a net positive in that it has galvanized our entire ecosystem towards action on modernizing data and process and workforce. That said, I think we're still looking at an overwhelming majority of people that want to head straight to that AI dessert table. The good news is that there's a ton of folks who are already thinking about how we move beyond sort of these toys to a true, whether it's agentic or AI of some sort, deep learning or whatever, that can take real trusted AI actions. To be clear, however, we're not there yet. I strongly encourage people to design systems and processes with strong human in the loop basis. But that said, there are really some cool technological advances and around things like GraphRag and extended context and small language models and other tools like that that are really approaching the promise of some amazing outcomes without a complete paradigm shift into how an organization thinks about data and AI.
Oh, love it. Jupiter, you've been very hands-on with AI in the sense of building bridges between things like AI assistants and operational systems like MCP, for example. What's that biggest gap between that idea that AI can explain, it can give you this answer and tell you the detail versus AI can operate, go out and get things done for you and then come back and say, hey, I got it done?
Yeah, yeah. I think the biggest difference is, I will say, accountability and reliability, right? So there is a huge difference between I am explaining something so that you understand, I am recommending you some stuff, and the way that I say I am now acting in the real world. And the difference is that acting has consequences. And the question is, who is accountable actually when something goes wrong, right? And to be more precise, the problem is more on when you have, let's say, the technology so that can operate. Where is the boundary of the operation? How can you guide him? How can you supervise those systems? And this is where the challenge is actually. That could be actually a big problem if you are in an enterprise field and you want actually to introduce this technology. But you have to shift. There's many things that you need to take into consideration. And I always take the example when you have an AI that is quite good. Imagine you have an intern that is a genius, that's somebody that understands everything, has access to everything. But now you put it in your company and you ask him the question, you ask a question, do that thing. Of course, he's capable of doing that, but he needs some supervision, he needs guidance, he needs to understand your value. He needs to understand exactly what he can do and what he cannot do. And he needs also to get some kind of feedback because he's still also learning from your environment, and every environment is quite different. And I think this is the kind of things also that we are going to see. And the biggest difference is exactly there, reliability and accountability, in my opinion.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Mr. Patrick, I was doing some research for this podcast and I saw that you made this statement on another, I believe it was another talk. I really like it. You said something to the effect that modernization is not optional. More time equals more pain. It's sort of succinct. I love it. But in regard to this AI question about what does 2026 look like, does that still fit perfectly here? How can we think about this sort of modernization that needs to happen in this actionable, sort of tangible way?
Yeah, absolutely. It's more true now than ever. We're already seeing this clear bifurcation between the data and AI haves versus the have-nots. Organizations that invested early in modern data foundations and governance can move quickly into things like agents and delegation. Everyone else finds that AI just magnifies their existing problems. So when I say modernization isn't optional, I mean delay has a compounding cost. So AI assumes clean data, clear ownership, systems that work together. The modernization work is unglamorous at best, but very real, right? Fixing data foundations, standardizing those workflows, putting guardrails in place so that AI can act safely. Without that, AI doesn't deliver leverage, it just delivers noise and risk.
Yeah. Yeah. As some are referring to sort of AI slop, it's just,
Absolutely. That's not a trough I want to eat at.
so shifting gears just a little bit is I think you'd both agree that the pace at which new models and new features and frankly, even entirely new products and software are coming out is just kind of ridiculously fast and furious, right? To keep up with. No one's probably keeping up at the edge of all these different evolutions and improvements. But one area that I'm watching that I think is rising above all of them is the whole topic of voice. Actually talking to AI and how we use voice with AI is getting better and better every day. And the reason I think that matters is simple. Voice lowers friction. You and I talking through this. We're not chatting, we're not typing this at the limitations of our hands. And if AI is always this sort of little annoying to type to, one of the sort of downstream consequences of this is that we're not going to maybe make that shift as strong to the delegation, getting AI to do things because we got to type all the work versus if it feels natural to speak to, maybe the doors get open, delegation becomes more tempting. And if you look at some of OpenAI's updates last month, it's basically a list of voice agent challenges that they're trying to eliminate. Things like hallucinations when it's silent, or noisy input errors, or multi-step workflows that frankly fall apart with the use of voice. And they also highlight things that are more stable voice output, broader access to custom voices. Even Google upgraded Gemini recently with AI voice features, rolling it into products like Gemini Live and Search Live. And frankly, research is showing that basically voice has to feel immediate or it fails. If users don't feel like they can have this conversation like the three of us are having, then yeah, I don't want anything to do with it. So if we think about AI 2026, do you think that voice becomes the new mainstream form of using AI? Are we going to shift to that? Jupiter, do you want to start with that one?
Yes, yes. Thank you for the question, Joshua. I agree with you that voice will bring a lot of, I will say, value for the use case where we see the speed of input is important. So imagine if you have a conversational agent where you have to give some kind of input, ask specific question and those things. Voice there also plays a big role. But there are also a lot of use cases where, in my opinion, precision is better than the speed of the input that you give. So imagine, for example, use case in the enterprise environment where you have, for example, to, let's say, have an agent that will pre-fill all your, I will say, your tax return. And all those contextual information where you need to give you some kind of guidance and so on, using the voice will be, in my opinion, very difficult because just the conversation itself can be so vague and not so precise that the agent that works behind can understand differently. Somebody will also agree that because of this voice interface, he has the possibility actually to ask things that are ambiguous or that he does not understand. But that supposes that the agent has the capability actually to identify those ambiguity. And this is quite different. There is also a lot of use case where the speed of the input matter, where I will say the intuitiveness of the conversation or the instruction matter. There the use case will become mainstream, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Patrick, do you got an opinion on this?
I would take a slightly different tact on this. I don't disagree with anything that Jupiter is saying. It's just when I think about voice as an interface, it's an incredibly broad and nuanced question. And I guess I would break it down a little with the challenges of things like privacy or idioms or feedback loops. Like I read a lot faster than I listen, and users could get frustrated with that. But then the advantages on the other side of that coin, people that may have lower literacy rates or the ability to do live translation or knowledge capture. There's some really, pros and cons to this, but really, I think I need to think about this in terms of consumer tech versus enterprise tech. The more we make this approachable and embeddable, think about the Ray-Ban Meta glasses or live translation in that context, or even the Star Trek, the ubiquitous computer that you can ask any question at any time. I think about the commercial applications in the short to medium term, and those are a little less pronounced, right? Enterprise tech, we're going to see far more impact from being able to streamline AI into existing motions that people are already doing, rather than spinning this out to voice, which really isn't a paradigm you see in enterprise setting. So I think about being able to go find data to answer a question, help me write the document and collect its insights, and then build slides or code to implement those sort of aggregate thoughts. So I think the voice impact will have probably an outsized impact on consumer tech, but I think enterprise tech, just they'll spend less time building it out,
That's right. Yeah. It's interesting. I didn't get to go, but watching it closely, the CES conference just happened, and there was a good smattering of what looked like innovations around voice. But to your point, I think what you're both saying is that it's not overwhelming yet. And it's probably something that, to your point, Patrick, is that it becomes this sort of consumer tech that the tech has to help us get there, which is great. And the question that is a quick follow in a lot of the dialogues here about voice is the sort of fear around the UI UX interfaces. And so there's a sort of maybe what feels like a jumping ahead too far, or jumping the gun, in the sense that, do visual interfaces start going away if everyone starts using voice? And I think you both put the sanity lens on there to say, hey, temper it down a little bit. Probably not going to flip a switch in 2026, but do you agree with the premise that UI UX interfaces would have a change, Jupiter?
No, I don't agree with that. So I think that voice will augment the UI interface, but not completely replace it. These are two different mediums for two different purposes, right? So there are a lot of things that you can, I will say, communicate via visual interface that you cannot do via voice. And I think there will be still some kind of use case, specifically for the consumer industry, where I will say the interaction or the speed of the interaction is more important than the visual thing. There, probably, the voice interface will be overwhelming, and probably we will have the UI completely disappear. So I think about use case where you have your smartphone and you want to do different things on your smartphone. You want it to do it fast, right? You don't want to know what kind of notification appears, or if you have to click on this certain button. This kind of use case or this kind of interface probably will disappear. But when you look on the other side, let's say, imagine you have dashboards, or imagine you have like a document or contract. All of these things needs to be visual, because there is a lot more information that you need to transfer that probably it will be difficult to capture with the voice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just in my own personal usages, voice is great going out. I don't have the patience to listen for the whole readout of answers and stuff like that. So there's all these nuances. And I think, Patrick, you hit on that as well. Do you see any sort of impact to visual interfaces? Do you agree with where Jupiter's going on this?
Well, I think this goes back to an idiom that I think a designer friend of mine once used, which is the more natural the interface, the more artificial the controls have to be. And so the easier things you make for the user, the harder it is for you to control that narrative. The voice may feel very human, but governance needs the receipts, right?
Yeah, that's
And
right.
so I think it's going to be tough. And I think it's going to take us many iterations to get there. Even looking at the most intuitive interfaces that most people have in their pockets, to Jupiter's point, that iPhone or the Android that you've got, took us a long time to get there, and we had to go through some pretty painful iterations of smartphones before we got there. And I think we're going to see similar stepped innovation around those sorts of controls.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's fair to say that not everything happens on an equal plane, right? You got enterprise pushing in different landscapes, but then consumer usage is pushing in maybe a slightly different way. And I know they're connected, but progress happens at different levels. Jupiter, if we dive into this just a little bit, and I'd like to better understand is, what do you see from your experiences as the hardest part of voice agents? Is it the model, the latency? You hinted at things, both you and
Yeah.
Patrick, but is it the workflow behind the scenes? What's your thoughts there?
Yes, I think the biggest challenge is not the latency itself, or I will say the model itself, but I think the biggest problem is that the voice interface allow I will say, the user to go in many directions very fast. What I call the diversity of intent. I may ask a specific agent to do something, but at the same time, I'm thinking about something. Then I will try to be nice. Then at the same time, we think probably you should do it in a better way. So consecutively, the instruction that I give can have a lot of meaning itself. And I think the biggest challenge is really to understand what does it mean in that context,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I've built a lot of voice agent, even to control some productions machine, like you have some $1 million machine where you are in the big environment where you cannot actually, let's say, use your hand for some security reason, then you have to interact with the voice. And this is the biggest challenge that you have. Please do that. But at the same time, when you do that, you have to make sure that every sentence, every word is well placed, right? So that
Exactly.
you achieve the intent that you want to have. And this is even difficult or more complex if you look on everyday, I will say, use case. For example, if you have a smartphone, you need to control the smartphone, you want to send one email to somebody, right? At the moment that you write email, you think about all the things that you need to do, and then you have to dictate that. And the AI agent in the background has to really understand what is the core of what you want to say, and
That's
then
right.
based on that, to really try to respond. And I think this is the most difficult part, in my opinion.
Yeah. Where my head's going with this is two things. First of all, it's I might tell my agent to do this task in 10 words, but to actually complete the task, to actually go through all the steps, all the workflows and everything, it's probably 200 words, like with the
Exactly.
description and the
With all the
details
things
and
that you have in mind that you want him to achieve, you will probably be like 200 word or 500 word because you want it to be more precise. And this is where the challenge comes. Then the agent need to make some assumption about what you want to do. This is where you, as an engineer, you need to put a lot of control behind to understand, to really capture the intent of the person of the user, so that you can interpret it very well. And this is the biggest challenge, in my opinion.
Yeah, context is king. I think about the commercial saturation diver who's down there and has to speak to his AI assistant. He's working on a pipe and he tells him to turn off the valve, and all of a sudden he gets real hard to breathe, right? Like you got to have the context, and it's
That's a
it's
good
the
one.
difference between people that are good at prompting and bad at prompting, and it's harder to do that verbally, or
Exactly.
harder to capture that verbally.
Even textual. So I give this example as a sort of tips and tricks when I'm using an LLM is that made phenomenal shift in how I interact. I would attempt to write the perfect prompt, and I would type it out, obviously, and I would go in there and I would say all the details. I'd give it a role, and I would probably end up with a prompt that's 20 lines, maybe. And that's like super beefy prompt. And what I realize is if I give the LLM that prompt and say, hey, make this prompt better, make it more robust, more detail oriented, have more context to it, I get back a prompt that's 200 lines and it's always produced better results. It's always because it's filled in all these gaps that I'm just typing in there. And you can take that just on the sort of textual input, but if you shift gears and think of it from a voice, it almost becomes exponentially more difficult because when you're typing, you're seeing this and you're able to self-edit. It's probably like writing a book, Patrick. Like you're writing it and you're like, oh, that's garbage. Let's delete that thing. Let's rewrite this. You have that sort of editing process to get it better. But when your voice, now you have to talk in circles to make sure that you've covered every topic and point. And so it's interesting only because you have engineers behind the scenes trying to capture that, trying to be like, okay, we've got to cover it from 15 different ways. I want to talk to you, Patrick, about a sort of slightly unique perspective in voice, and that's from a trust and governance view. And I know you're very deep into this subject matter, and you hinted at this sort of the privacy thing was what makes voice harder than text to push forward. But is it privacy expectations that are a big thing? I think audibility, consent, maybe this who said what ambiguity. Can you fill in how that looks from a trust and governance point of view?
Yeah, I think that's, again, another one of those nuanced questions. You've got a sliding scale that you're going to have to think about. Privacy is certainly a question, especially when you take into account the setting that these things may be happening, right? And so it might not just be privacy of what's being provided for the core workflow, but what are the things that AI agent is going to overhear? Or what are the things that may confuse it or interrupt it, right? If I think in a DoD parlance, right? What happens when I'm asking an AI something on the battlefield and it misses a very key modifier, like a not or don't do this thing, right? Like those are the things that I would think about. And it's tough, especially when you get into like idioms and things like that. So how do we capture, validate, put guardrails around, and then what are the outcomes that we're actually looking for with this voice-driven system? If it's play the next song on my playlist, the danger of getting that wrong is pretty low. But if it's launch an ICBM, like that becomes a different question, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's a lot of checks and balances that need to happen in that scenario. I agree. So shifting gears, I want to talk about a pretty big topic, at least front and center for a lot of people. I think that voice is this sort of on-ramp or potential entrance to better AI. And I think there's this real leap that some of us are experiencing that happens when the conversation doesn't end with an answer, meaning I'm getting back the details and text to say, hey, this is what this thing is. This is how I would do it. And the LM comes back with these details that I need to take whatever action. And that's it. The onus is still on us to take that action. And the leap is really when the LLM doesn't end with this answer, but it ends with action. We've danced around it a little bit today, but it brings us to this phrase that everyone is using, and half the world, I would say, still doesn't fully trust, maybe doesn't understand is fair to push, is the topic of agents. And I'd like to not assume that everybody's up to speed with the latest and greatest. And so I like to start with a bit of a definition of agents for our listeners in order to simply level set, make it approachable for everybody. And I will start just say, I like the definition that an agent is simply just AI that takes steps for me. It may open software, it may call a tool, it might run a SQL query, it updates some records from that, it might place an order based on the goal that you're going after. And the easiest example that I tend to always use with people is just simply making a reservation. You know, ChatGPT, for example, can connect to OpenTable and give it the details you want. And it can go out and help make a reservation for a dinner for you. Do you all both align with that definition? How would you expand it or clarify it? Especially help folks understand what's happening differently behind the scenes when I go to prompt an LLM, sort of this question response versus going agent mode. Jupiter, do you want to start with that one?
Yes, I'm very happy that you asked the question because there is a lot of, there is a lot of problem when the people understand AI, specifically with the buzzword and so on. But I think sometimes we have to ground it, right? So from the research, there are 4 characteristics that an AI agent needs to have. And I always say, receive, reflect, act, and learn. These are the 4 characteristics you have. So an agent is an independent entity, which means that he has the ability to take some kind of decision independently. He lives in his own environment. An agent needs the ability to perceive his environment. What is in the environment? It could be, for example, the goal that he needs to achieve. It could be the tools that he can use to achieve that goal. It could be actually the environment that when I act in that specific environment, I'm changing actually that environment. So it needs to get some kind of sense of that environment. This is the perceived part. he needs to think, really, to plan. So if I have a specific goal that I need to achieve, and I know what I have in my disposal, I need to make a plan how I can get there. And generally, right now, we use a large language model to do that planification task right now, because they are just better at reasoning than other technology that we had before. And then you have the third part, which is acting. Acting means that I need to influence my environment so that I can achieve a goal. And let's say, for example, if you have a small robot, taking one example that everyone knows, right? Imagine I have like the Roomba that clean up my floor. The goal is to clean up my floor. You need to perceive, you need to know where is my house, where is the floor, what are the limits of the floor, and so on. And in terms of action, this is actually what he does. So going forward, going backward, cleaning, or going to the changing station, and so on. And also one part that is also quite important that many people also missed is the ability to learn. What I mean by that, you can learn online, meaning that while I am trying to achieve my goal, I make some kind of mistake, then I learn and then I correct it. You have a Roomba, the Roomba needs to go somewhere, but then you have the carpet, he cannot go over the carpet, then you understand, okay, this is somewhere that I cannot go, right? There is a boundary. Then you return the right. And you can also learn offline, which means that you can do a lot of exercise or runs. And once you are done, look back again on what you have done and you say, okay, actually, I could have done it better if I have done it this way. And I think these four characteristics are quite important. And you see the difference. You have the difference now. You can see the difference between, I will say, a simple chatbot, so conversational AI, where you ask specific question, it gives you some kind of answer, but actually it doesn't do something practically or concretely, right? And you have also some kind of other application where they cannot learn. Imagine you have a software that uses a large language model that does one inference, right? Even if it's able to react, but it doesn't learn. You cannot, in my opinion, qualify that as an agent because he will not evolve. He has a set of capability that is bounded, and then he cannot go beyond those capabilities. I really like the question because this is something that comes a lot, even with different customers that I have. But I think these are the four elements how you can really identify what is an agent versus something else.
It's funny you brought up Roomba. I'm obsessed with where technology, especially consumer technology, comes in with AI because it's just such a easy way to see how it plays out for a non-technical user. I have two Roombas. I have one downstairs. I have furniture. I have a kitchen. I have different obstacles. And nothing is more fun than spending a Friday evening watching my Roomba learn. Watching my Roomba say, oh, okay, here's the living room. Oh, I can mark the living room and say, hey, this is the boundaries later on if I only want you to clean the living room. Here's the boundaries of my kitchen, maybe my bathroom, maybe where the hallway, the entranceway. It can figure this out. But then what's really fun is to mess with the agents, and I'll move my chair. Right? I have bar stools at the kitchen. I'll move a bar stool and see how it adapts, how it learns automatically without having me to go into the app and say, yeah, this is different. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's just fun. Patrick, how do you explain agents to others? How do you share your concept?
You would
there?
ask me to follow a very educated, thorough answer from a guy with a PhD, wouldn't
Absolutely.
you?
This is the fun part of the show.
I'm going to give you the dumb guy answer, right? Which is really just the chatbot. It will give you advice, and I'll put that in heavy quotes, but really any action is up to the user. Whereas the agent, for me, and this is the twist I'll put on it, agent carries responsibility. Both have their strengths and weaknesses, but the moment the AI can take action, you have to care about governance, auditability, paths to the reversal of that action. Because mistakes now are no longer just wrong answers, they're real outcomes. And so to me, I think that's the biggest thing is who's gonna do the thing? Is it the dumb guy behind the terminal? Or is it gonna be the AI agent who's actually gonna do something and ruin your day? Right?
That's right. Yeah. It's really interesting when you deep dive into that shift because that's really what people have to get their head wrapped around is like making it very practical. I have used agents so far to do really complex research reports. And because I know that I can go out there, look at the source, go do the multiple steps it takes to read it, refine it, understand it, and then take that set of research from one website or one data source and compare it with another and see where the idea is. It's doing all these multiple things, but a sort of innocent way of using an agent, right? There's not a whole, like, the responsibility is that it's on me still, I would say. Maybe I'm missing something here, but like, it's still, I take the research report, I use it as an information source and go forward. Like, if I didn't check or validate that or put that on the agent to make sure that all my sources are documented, that everything is legit and not completely made up, there's this sort of innocent path forward on using agents. But I think where it gets really interesting is this sort of responsibility idea where there's financial implications. You've already hinted at some of the life and death implications that could happen. And I see these on different ends of a spectrum. I'm curious, like, any follow-up that you would add to that, Jupiter, what Patrick said about this responsibility?
Yes, I think at the moment that you put any entities that can influence the environment, then you need to think about the consequences of that. And particularly for AI agent or LLM based AI agent, where you cannot really reliably predict what will be the outcome of what he does. You need to put some kind of guardrail in place, right? So you need to have a constrained environment, probably a constrained environment. You need to make sure that every action that he does is reversible. So such in case that if something goes wrong, then you can come back. And then you need also to make sure that the way that he operates in that environment is auditable. You need to trace exactly what was the different step that leads to that decision or that lead actually to that consequences. And there is also some legal aspect regarding the consequences because it can be something that is benign, but it can also be something that costs life, right? And then you need to also put a legal frame on top of it. What does it mean? Right? Who is responsible if we have some kind of consequences? Is it the person that designed the agent? Is it the LLM provider? Is it the person that gave the instruction that the LLM understood very wrongly, that the agent understood
That's
wrongly?
right.
There is a lot of things that you need to put in place, actually.
Yeah. I feel like that's a whole podcast in itself, is the legal implications of AI, right? It's just such a fascinating topic. I'm not at all envious of my friends in legal. They have a fun job for sure. What I find really interesting is that we're getting these strong signals in 2026 that this is the year that sort of agents, for a lack of better term, go mainstream. And what I mean by that is get the visibility and at least the initial usage. I went through and I always look at what's happening in the industry. And I saw that Gartner predicts up to 40% of enterprise applications are going to include integrated task-specific agents by 2026. And OpenAI, again, has been talking a lot about building these sort of reliable agentic workflows. And they're adding tools to let these models execute these different steps, not just talk about them. You look at what Anthropic shipped recently, with Claude Sonnet, with the Claude Agent SDK, for example, making it sort of more front and center and pushing this. And Microsoft is pushing agentic commerce, this idea of a co-pilot checkout. I don't know if you've seen, but it's simple. It lets people complete purchases right inside the chat. And it's got the integrations to all the major vendors like Shopify, PayPal, Stripe, Etsy, you name it. And it's just connecting those dots. And I think that the stat that's most fascinating to me is on the behavior side, right? It's what people are actually doing. Adobe actually reported AI-driven traffic, essentially agents to retail sites, rose nearly 700%, 693% year over year. 700% during the 2025 holiday season, meaning consumers are already shopping using AI, right? They're already connecting the dots there, and that's playing out. And I like to say that I think it's clear that agentic AI is here. It's charging forward. It's got a lot of the aspects that you've both brought up so far. But the question becomes, if Microsoft, Adobe, and all these others are agentifying things like commerce, for example, or OpenAI and Anthropic and others, they're giving better tools around building agents, right? Giving the capability to keep moving forward and building out these different use cases. As if we sit in the user space, if we put ourselves as a user, what do you think is fair or good or okay to be delegating to agents? And maybe the opposite is also important, is what should we not be delegating? Patrick, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think my core position is delegate reversible low blast radius tasks first, whereas protecting judgment heavy or subjective decisions, I just don't think we're ready for that yet. Like, I think good examples are things like data prep or reconciliation or reporting updates or getting into the agentic stuff, scheduling, routing, notifications. Those sorts of things I think are good delegation examples. Legal or disciplinary actions, irreversible financial commitments, those sorts of things are places you don't want to do delegation. It's always the sort of unintended consequences that I think we're going to have to learn how to handle those edge cases and things like that. An early AI example before the days of ChatGPT, when we're talking like 10 plus years ago, the DoD had created this capability that was used to identify tanks and do simple friend or foe determination, right? Problem was all of the Allied tank photos were taken on clear sunny days, and enemy combatant tanks were captured in realistic settings. So you didn't teach it how to recognize tanks. You taught it how to decide whether it was a sunny day or not.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And so I think it's like those unintended consequences that we're not ready to think through all of the edge cases yet. We just don't understand the problem set well enough.
That's right. Jupiter, do you have a thought based on what
Yes,
Patrick
I
says?
completely agree exactly with what Patrick said. When I talk with customer, I always say the good agentic use case or the use case, the kind of work that you want to delegate, it needs to be repeatable, it needs to be reversible, and it needs to be auditable. So repeatable in the sense that if it is something that, let's say, you do on the regular base and so on, when you have an agent, you don't need a human to be involved, right? If it is reversible, then you know if something goes wrong, you can always go back to the initial state, right? And auditable in the sense that you need to know exactly what's happened in every step. Then somebody can really judge. And if you really want to push it to full autonomous deployment, then you need to put some kind of guardrail. And this is where it becomes really, really tricky. Because guardrail that you know right now are for your view of the use case at that moment. You have these unintended consequences that will be difficult for you to capture, actually. And this is something that can be really tricky. So if you have, for example, something that is high stake with a higher risk and where there is a lot of ambiguity, where even the definition of what is the goal is not clear enough, I will just say, put your hands off and let a human do that. But if it is something that is clear, defined, repeatable, reversible, and auditable, this is the perfect use case where you need to delegate that.
Do you have any examples off the top of your head that you've seen in your work that agents have really sort of made you step back and say,
I always use. I have one agent that runs in the background and classify all the documents that I have in my drive, right? So the problem is that sometimes you have 10 copies of that PowerPoint presentation because you make a copy for that presentation, you do another copy there, you do different things. So
you only
personally,
have 10 copies? I think I'm up to 100 each. Yes.
yeah,
That's a
so it's something
perfect
that's so
example.
common. And then I have one
Right.
agent, so I schedule it every night, and every night it goes over and try to make sense. And I have this classification system that I have put myself over the year. But rather than me making sure that every document is at the right place and that I can find, I just let an agent open it, read what is it about, try to check 2 or 3 things, and try to then classify and put it in the right folder for me. This is something that I know, okay, imagine I lost the document, I can search the whole drive, I will find it there somewhere. I can always reverse. It is repeatable because this is something that was annoying. For example, you are at the customer meetings, right? And now suddenly he asks for a specific explanation about the topic and you know, okay, I already did that, but I don't remember where it is. But with my classification system, I know it is about this product, it is talking about this feature, then I can go there and I can find it, right?
Yeah,
Right away.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
This is one example that just come out of on top of my head.
I'd pay for that microservice.
There you
Bring some
go.
organization to my life.
I was going to ask you, like, do you steal Jupiter's idea for that agent, or do you have any other examples, Patrick, that you've seen agents go after already that have proved useful, or at least made you step back and pause and be like, this might be on it, right? Anything that comes to mind?
The interesting thing where I've seen agents do well is where they continue a chain of thinking or a chain of action. So, like you talked about assembling data for a research paper. I have seen agents that have been written, and this is especially true when you have a semantic model running alongside them. But if they're able to do reasoning and understand relationships and not just individual data assets or data points, nodes on the graph, then it starts to get really interesting because you could say, okay, go research these 10 topics, but then finding what you think is most interesting out of those 10 topics for whatever the overall goal is, go find another 100 topics beyond that that go deeper or continue your research or expand your context. That's where the sort of agentic reasoning with a semantic model, to me, I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I may add also a few words, just to clarify how powerful that is also that when you have the agent that is able to make some kind of generate some kind of formal semantic, then you can have formal reasoning on top of it. And reasoning means that you can infer or generate new knowledge based on what you know. Meaning that the agent will be in the position that he can now infer new knowledge that even you that were providing in the context, new knowledge that was not in the context, but is able actually to infer that knowledge based on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just reading this article about in mathematics. I don't have all the details at fingertips, but such a perfect example of this is that it literally is figuring out new methods for calculating problems that have been unsolved by physicists and mathematicians for 100 years. It's literally connecting dots between different types of mathematics to come up with an answer that
unique way of
unique knowledge,
driving conclusion, right? Unique mathematics, actually.
Yeah,
concept.
And not just mathematics, right? Everything from the combinatorics stuff inside of math,
right?
all the way to chemical compositions for drug research, right?
Yeah,
Just the ability to iterate through many different ideas and then find ones that are most closely matching your outcome parameters. Yeah. Super cool.
Super fascinating to even think about it. I don't want to dive off too much, but you shift from the sort of academic point of view, but more to the business worldview is, hey, what pockets or areas in a business context have we really not gone after or have shine a light on that maybe an agent can say, oh, I've got sales data over here, marketing data over here, and now finance data, customer service data. I put all that. Oh, did you think about this thing? Here, or here's if you did this thing, you would solve this new problem, new use case, which is the win of an analyst is being able to put all that stuff together and find those golden nuggets.
I mean, we're all systems builders, right? Like, think about the number of times when you have optimizations that you would love to send a senior engineer to go work on to make your system faster, but feature parity is more important. And so to be able to carve off someone who is an agent and say, go make this thing 10% faster, that's huge.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. I want to pause here for a second because you're listening to this as listeners and feeling this sort of dichotomy that I have is I'm both really excited about all this, a little uneasy because there's this idea that you got a lot to learn, a lot to understand, a lot being thrown at you, and not everything is solved and worked out and figured out. And I'd say that's probably the right reaction. It's probably, we're right in the middle. Agents can unlock a lot of leverage and they have this sort of pending potential, as I like to say. They're forcing us to ask harder questions about things like cost and trust, as you brought up, Patrick, and control. And I want to go there next. I think that's a really good theme and segment that I want to touch into is around the fact that agentic AI is exciting and it has tremendous potential. And it feels like sometimes agents are owning the headlines in the AI space. But that's really until you go under the covers a bit and you ask, what is all this costing? What are they allowed to do? And it's important to understand how constraints actually show up for people. Agents will have to show up asking more questions to get better answers. We talked about this earlier with the prompts becoming more significant. Agents might have to move slower to make sure that they're touching all the aspects of what the goal is. But all of that, when you're putting more processing power behind it, it's costing more. All of this brings us to something where I think there's these two forces that might just quietly decide what happens with AI overall in 2026. And they can be fully realized as the constraints of infrastructure, the cost and the significance of building these things, and then the rules and the regulations and the governance. One, if you're not aware, AI is expensive to run at scale. I saw that Goldman Sachs was talking about AI investment surpassing $500 billion in 2026, which is not a small number by any means. And Reuters also reported that XAI is investing $20 billion in a Mississippi data center, which is expected to start operations next month in February. And it's taking compute to 2 gigawatts. Let's put that into context so our listeners understand the impact of this, meaning it's driven by demand, but 2 gigawatts is enough electricity to power 1.5 to 2 million US homes. And it's on par with really the total power draw of some mid-sized cities. Not small, not at all. But this is the sort of demand that they are thinking that needs to take place. And Jupiter, being in the EU, you probably know this better than anyone, is this sort of shift to regulation part around the EU AI Act and that's supposed to be applicable, I think, in August, which
Yes,
really
it's
means
actually,
yeah,
yeah, in some countries already in place.
it's
The
already in
first,
place. Yeah. So, really means that users across EU are going to notice that AI is sort of asking for things like more confirmation and offering fewer fully automatic actions. And if we look at models, I sort of use GDPR as an example, is that if this takes hold in the EU, kind of works out all the pieces and gets in play, GDPR has the power to spread to other places in the world and set standard around how we do that. Thought of another way is that the rules and constraints aren't really this sort of background character, right? It's not this footnote in a book. They're part of the main plot here. And so the question is, so if we take these two forces into 2026, what do you think becomes the sort of bigger bottleneck? Is it the total? Are we going to hit a bottleneck of the sort of resources and the cost of compute? Or is do you think we're going to be slowed down more by, say, we had all the resources in the world, we could run the highest, most scalable models in the world? Are we still hamstrung by what our progress on trust and governance, which, Patrick, we know is a big deal, big conversation already. You probably spend a good portion of your day talking about this stuff. Do we see regulation come in 26 that shows that we can move forward with a governed perspective?
I'll give you the short answer first, the bottom line up front, right? I think short-term trust and governance is going to be the limiting factor. I think long-term, both of these considerations just converge into cost. And I'll distill it a little further and say that regulation doesn't stop AI. Like, it's going to decide which AI survives, right? Because people will always write to the regulations. So really what we're going to have to be doing is making sure we're taking a stepped approach rather than trying to boil the ocean and do all the things all the times. Keep in mind that there's a pretty massive overinflation going on in the market, and a course correction is going to be inevitable. And I'll put this into further context because you brought up data centers and prices and things like that. But there's a funny statement that's making the rounds on the internet about the cost of memory, computer memory. And it's a little flippant, but there's a kernel of truth in there that's not to be missed. And it says, I think it was something about the reason that RAM prices have quadrupled is because an enormous amount of not yet manufactured memory has been purchased with money that doesn't exist to be installed in GPUs that haven't been built yet, destined for data centers that haven't been constructed, powered by infrastructure that may never come online, all to meet demand that doesn't exist and to chase profits that are mathematically impossible. Like, there's so much going on.
Yeah.
And I think that, yes, the technology has some evolutions that need to happen. Yes, people need to have some education to get there. But ultimately, like, we're probably going to have to figure out some ways that this doesn't become, again, mathematically impossible. That's where my head is on this problem right now. And I think the winners in 2026 are going to be boringly compliant and quietly effective. Like, I think those are going to be the folks that get through the wickets.
Got it. Yeah. Jupiter, thoughts?
I have a slightly different view. I think the limiting factor in the short term will be the compute power to the simple fact that the demand is growing. So imagine everything that you have right now. So every computer, every program on your computer, every smartphone, every apps in your smartphone right now use some kind of LLM in the background. And this is going to grow. So the demand will still grow. And right now, there is a reason why there is this bubble, because everyone sees where we are going. We are going, right? The demand will just explode. But I'm not sure if we will be able to save all that demand. But I think the fact is the consumption will still grow exponentially. And now on the long term, I think governance will need to then play a role. Right now, many organizations or many countries do not know how to govern those things. They assume something. And generally, when you have an assumption, you don't understand something, the first thing is to just put it aside, right? Put rules so that you want to slow the development of it. But it's really not going to happen. But I expect that with the time, for example, in 2026 and 2027, they will get more educated, they will understand the system, and now they will put better governance role in place, right? And I think in the medium term and the long term, this is what is going to slow actually the adoption of those technology.
Okay. My mind is spinning 100 miles an hour. It's just a lot of stuff good to think about. I want to take this down a notch and from the sort of macro view of regulation governance and think about what a realistic view of this that you expect orgs to adopt in 26. And I think you hinted at it, Patrick. Just want to explore it a bit more. Imagine that leaders are going to be paying attention to the governmental and the international organizations work, like the EU AI Act, maybe even restricting certain use cases because of the sort of challenges it might provide. Maybe asked more simply is, where do you think organizations wanting to get the value out of AI this year really should be focused on making progress, right? They probably can't really control the capacity that they want to use. And some organizations are probably trying to push that limit, but most I would say are not. But from a trust and governance and regulation, and where do you think they should be focused on, Patrick?
That's a hard question to answer without context. I'll go back. Context is king, right? It's like, and different organizations are gonna have different problem sets and problem spaces. But let me give you one answer in terms of what they need to focus on. And I'll say I spend most of my time in the US federal space, and a lot of that time is dedicated to DoD, who's thinking through problems and trying to address some of the sort of asynchronous issues that we've had, like what happens when soldiers get out in the field and they have questions and they can't talk to the commanders back at base, right? And so I'll call these sort of decision support solutions. And so I think the thing that people are going to need to understand is that you really have to be able to take a technology and really narrow it down to a use case. And so the challenge, though, is right now, the thing that is most ubiquitous is LLMs. And if you take a large language model and you try to cram it into a very bespoke sort of solution, you take something that was, and I'll use big air quotes here, something that is inherently smart, and you've made it stupid because you put unnecessary constraints on it, right? So I think like the things that people are going to have to start to think about are, how do I take pre-slices of my data that are easily consumed? How do I take these small language models that can be very bespoke or maybe even foundational language models with sort of semantics around it? And how do I create these very niche solutions that are targeted at a specific thing? So in my example, the DoD, they want decision support. They want another teammate who can more rapidly assess data and make informed decisions. And I think we're going to have to do things like that per modality.
Jupiter, do you have a quick thought on this
Yes,
one?
I completely agree. I'm also a big advocate of small language model or specialized language model, in the sense that sometimes you don't need the breadth of capability of a bigger large language model for your use case, right? Having the ability actually to have a smaller one that is specialized, that we take those capability and just focus it on what it needs to do, gives you a lot of advantage. You can run it locally. You can put it in the control environment. You can put it inside your network or inside your environment and really have the control all over it. But on the other side, I think also that when it comes for governance of those systems or regulation of those systems, we need to have some kind of maturity around it. And that will grow
Yeah.
over time. And that's why I also encourage any organization that I have the chance to advise to say experiment. Let the people experiment. They will see on their own what are the limitations, what works, what doesn't work. And as fast as where are the boundaries, then you can put proper governance in place. Right.
Yeah, and that's super important. Like just having that sort of concrete understanding of what that limitation is or what the situation is. I totally get it. Gentlemen, we've been responsible adults today for a while. You know, we've been talking about the sort of future of AI with the mindset shift. We talked about voice AI, agents, constraints, governance, all of it. But I think you both know me. We got to have some fun before we close this out. So I have a crazy idea. We're going to do a lightning round. Are you guys up for it? All right. So the rules are simple. You got to keep it tight and there's no hedging. You can't, no depends or if this plays out, then this. You got to pick a side, pick a point. Could be wrong. Totally fine. But I'm going to throw it at you and then we'll go with Jupiter first and then Patrick on each of these and try to keep it fast and furious. First question for you is, will most people talk to AI in 2026 or still mostly type? I think I know the answers. Jupiter?
No, in 2026, there is still type. There will be a lot of typing, but there will be a huge growth on talking.
Got it.
Yeah.
Patrick?
I think we'll head towards a hybrid model, but yes, if I had to pick a side, typing is certainly going to continue to be the clear winner, I think.
Got it. Do we need more or less regulation around AI? Patrick?
More. We need to make more good regulation.
That's right. Exactly where I was going. Smarter, clearer regulation is almost a requirement for success. But I think we will have to have more. Yeah.
Got it. What's one task that you'd actually trust an AI agent to handle for you today? Not using the examples you've given out, something different. Jupiter?
Oh, researching stuff online.
Researching. Got it. Okay. Patrick?
I would call it what you will, data aggregation, data summarization, like parsing through big chunks of data very quickly and giving me a consumable outcome.
Got it. Perfect. What's one task you wouldn't let an AI agent do yet? What you would not let an AI agent do?
Fill in my tax return.
That's a good one.
Boy, we're
Patrick?
thinking the same direction. I say irreversible decisions, especially those with money attached to them.
Okay. So no money involved with AI agents. No purchasing.
Don't touch my bank account. That's right.
Got it. Perfect. All right. Next one. Should you stick to one LLM, say ChatGPT or Claude or what have you, Gemini, or should you be using many different LLMs?
Experiment as many as you can. Each LLM is based on the way that he has been trained, on the data set that he has been trained. And every provider or platform inference has their own way of training the LLM. So experiment as much as you can and try to identify the one that works best for your specific use case, for your different specific use case.
Got it. Patrick?
Totally agree. Yeah, I would say as many as you can get your hands on. And if you can start doing things like orchestrating them, that's even extra credit.
Extra credit. Love it. All right. Lastly, what is your personal LLM of choice if you could only have one? If I pigeonholed you to one, what would you go with? Jupiter.
Yeah, so I will go with Claude Sonnet, the 4.5, I think, right now. Right? Yeah. It's the best one that I use.
We're in violent agreement today. I would say the one I've used the most over time in the last, let's say, 12 to 18 months has been ChatGPT. But yeah, at this particular moment in time, I would probably pick Claude if I only had to have one because it does the most things the most well. If I could use poor English, but unstructured, structured code. Yeah, I think Claude has got a better overall.
I have a sense there's a trend going because I'm right in the thick of this where I've long had a subscription to ChatGPT, been using it religiously, but I'm noticing that especially when I get into coding and Cloud Code, when I get into any of those sort of really heavy analytical tasks, I'm starting to see better answers out of my experimentations with Claude. Really interesting. Maybe next time we're on, we have another shift after that. Gentlemen, Jupiter, Patrick, thank you so much for making the future feel a little bit more clear. I enjoyed this conversation. Again, my head's spinning. I've got 15 open lines of thought going on right now because so many interesting things that we touched on. But I do think the future feels a little bit more concrete because of you too. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving the time to us. And I would actually ask you one question before we go. What's your takeaway? What'd you learn today?
Oh, a lot. I like the fact that we talked back voice a little bit because it's one thing to see the headlines and the hype and all, but to have this sort of sanity check on these things is always the best for me because I think most of these topics, agents, same thing, have a sort of middle ground where is probably the better place to think and play and do. I definitely got some ideas around agents and what I need to go after. And what I think we did holistically, and was my intent in all this, is to make it more approachable. We didn't talk in the hype. We didn't go off into the fairyland of it all, but like get tangible with what people can do and use. And that's sort of my modus operandi. That's Jupiter, and I know for you as well, like we spend a lot of time making these sort of big ideas, big, sometimes complex and comprehensive ideas, put them into a landscape that everybody can understand. I like it when everybody has a seat at the virtual table, But thank you both to you. I appreciate you so much. Hopefully, if everything goes right, I might actually go through and measure and see how close you guys were on some of these thoughts and predictions and ideas for 2026. And maybe we have a follow-up. No, not promising anything, but it could be interesting to come back at the end of the year and see where the landscape lies.
Love it.
Cool. Until then, I'll see you both again. Have a good one.
All right. Thanks, gents.
That was a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. Here's what AI could look like heading into 2026. AI shifts from answering questions to taking action through agents that can plan, execute, and learn, not just respond. The real differentiator won't be the model you choose, but whether your data, your governance, and your processes are ready for AI to operate safely. Constraints like cost, infrastructure, regulation will shape more progress than raw innovation. And here's my biggest takeaways from this conversation. Agents change the stakes. Once AI can act, not just advise, accountability, auditability, and human oversight become non-negotiable. Delegate carefully. Start with what's repeatable, reversible, and auditable, and keep judgment-heavy decisions human for now. Progress beats hype. The organizations that win won't chase every new feature. They're going to quietly modernize and apply AI where it actually delivers value. Now, before you drop off, I have an ask. Let us know what you agreed with, what you didn't, and what you want us to explore next. We want to go after the real questions that you're wrestling with. If you have feedback, send it our way at podcast@alteryx.com. And make sure to subscribe to Alter Everything. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.